All right, good afternoon and welcome back, everybody. I hope that everybody is enjoying all of these sessions as much as I have so far. My name is Melissa Denomi. I work at the Medical College of Wisconsin, and I have been happy to have the opportunity to work on the AHW Safe Healthy Streets grant since 2017, I guess, when we submitted it. So for our next three presenters, we're going to be looking at the reimagining of our streets and talking about safety and health equity. First up, we've got Marissa Meyer. She'll be presenting on active streets from barricades to bump outs. She has been a transportation planner with the city of Milwaukee for 4 years. Her primary work is focused on pedestrian and bicycle transportation, and she's currently leading a Safe Routes to School infrastructure project for the city. Her interests also include expanding and strengthening community engagement and addressing climate change concerns in transportation. She has a bachelor's degree in environmental studies from the University of Kansas and a master's in urban planning from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. All right, welcome, Marissa.
Hello, hello. I'm Marissa Meyer, transportation planner. I'm a white woman. I have brown hair, brown eyes, and I'm wearing a blue shirt. And I'm talking about rapid implementation. Actually, I think those two presentation titles are switched. So I'll be talking about rapid implementation today. And the first question is, what is rapid implementation? So this is our term for these quick, low-cost street improvements. We've seen a number of examples today already from different cities, including in our keynote address this morning. And these changes are designed to increase the safety and comfort for people no matter how they're traveling, whether they're walking, biking, taking transit, driving, etc. And one of the big benefits, again, is that they're low cost and relatively quick to employ. These can be done with various materials. Usually paint and plastic posts are the primary ones used, but there can also be planters or other objects, even bike share stations or bike racks, for example. And they can be a number of different types of improvements too. So today I'll be talking almost exclusively about curb extensions, but this rapid implementation style can also be used for pedestrian islands, pedestrian plazas, such as closing off a right turn bypass lane, or traffic circles as well. These projects are easy to adjust after installation. So for example, if you install these posts and it turns out the street is actually a little bit too narrow, you can come back in and move the posts another foot or two out. Whereas had you built that in concrete from the start, that would be a much more expensive change to make. But these projects can be a step towards permanent changes and building something in concrete. One of the main types of benefits of this for these types of projects is that it just literally creates more space for people walking. So you can see in this image where a space of the street that is not sidewalk has been carved out for people walking and turned into a kind of pseudo sidewalk. And they also shorten crossing distances. So if you can take 5, 6, 7, 8 feet from both sides of the street, that's that many fewer seconds that someone walking is in the street and potentially vulnerable to getting hit by someone who's driving. They can also change the behavior of people who are driving. So for example, if you build a curb extension, even if it's rapid implementation and it's only really plastic posts, people don't want to drive over those. So if a person is stopped, such as if they're going to turn left or if they're waiting for someone who is going to cross the street, instead of being able to whip around on the right side to pass that person, this rapid implementation stops that from happening, which is a major safety benefit. Rapid implementation can also slow motor vehicle speeds a little bit because they narrow the street visually and also tighten the turning radius, which forces people to slow down as they're taking a turn. Another benefit is preventing illegal parking. In Milwaukee, we have an ordinance against parking too close to a crosswalk, but often that is not abided by very well, and you'll see people parking right up against the crosswalk. And the problem with that is that it reduces the visibility of people who are about to cross the street, both from a person driving to the person walking and in the other direction as well. And rapid implementation can increase yielding to pedestrians, partially because of that visibility factor. It literally makes it easier for people walking and driving to see each other. And also because it sends a different message to people who are driving about what the purpose of this street is. So in 2020, we at the City of Milwaukee wanted to pilot this rapid implementation idea because we had seen it done in other cities very successfully, and we wanted to try and do it ourselves. And part of the reason for doing this was to address those concerns about traffic safety that have come from our community all across the city. And initially, when we conceived of this project, we were thinking that it would be funded by community organizations, primarily business improvement districts. But with the multimodal unit budget, we were able to fund it with city money, which did make it more equitable because we weren't putting that funding burden on the business improvement districts. We chose two different corridors, one north side and one south side, to do these projects on. For South 13th Street, we did 6 intersections, spreading from Harrison Avenue to Oklahoma Avenue. And then on North 27th Street, we did 4 intersections from State Street to Wells Street. And for South 13th Street, we paired with the Crystal Corridor bid. And for North 27th Street, we paired with the Near West Side Partners. For these projects, we did curb extensions with tan paint and plastic posts, and we installed them in summer of 2020. And the cost was about $15,000 to $20,000 per intersection. We do hope that in the future that cost will come down because the bids were higher than we expected. So we're hoping that in future years, it will be even more cost effective than it was initially, because these costs are significantly lower than doing an intersection in concrete. In order to do these projects, we needed to sign maintenance agreements with the bids, because one of the big concerns going into them was if, for example, posts got knocked down, what would we do? How would we take care of it? So the bids were responsible for notifying the city of any issues, like posts getting knocked down, sweeping out these curb extension areas if debris was piling up because our city street sweepers can't reach behind the posts, and also removing snow. So similar to the street sweepers, the snow plows can't reach behind these posts. So we needed the bids to clear out the snow from the crosswalks so that people walking would still be able to get through. Meanwhile, the city responsibilities were replacing any posts that got knocked down and also maintaining the paint over time. We were able to do a few different types of before and after studies, mainly speed studies, yielding studies, and some community surveys. So with speed studies, these were done with a radar unit that we attach to a pole and just leave up for several days. And then we analyzed the results that it gives us. And we saw reductions in people's speeding, so just going over the speed limit to any degree, between about 10% to 18%. And then the really positive thing was that we saw a reduction in excessive speeding, so 10 miles per hour or more over the speed limit of up to 40%. And we know that speed drastically affects how serious injuries can be if a person driving hits a person walking. So seeing that reduction in excessive speeding was really encouraging. We also did some yielding studies. So these were done by having an observer, one of our transportation operations assistants, go out to some uncontrolled crosswalks on both of these streets. And uncontrolled here means there was no stop sign or stop light forcing the person driving to stop. So they would have to see the person walking, about to cross the street, and stop for them. So the observer observed people who were naturally crossing the street already, and also conducted some test crossings too, in order to have more samples to analyze. Because, for example, if we only had 10 before and 10 after samples to look at, people to look at, then it would be a lot harder to see changes between them over time. And we did see increases in yielding, which again was really encouraging. Mike Amsden actually mentioned these. We saw an increase of about 23% on North 27th Street, and on South 13th Street, because the initial yielding rate was so low, about 23%, or sorry, about 3%, we actually saw an increase of 6 times over the previous rates of yielding. So again, this was a huge benefit of this type of project. And lastly, community surveys. So as has been mentioned, the Safe and Healthy Streets survey on North 27th Street, we don't have the results from yet, but we were able to look at the Envision South 13th Street Together survey, which was done by the city's Department of City Development in partnership with some other community organizations. And some of the results that we've seen from this survey are that post-project, all travel modes are perceived as safer. So when people were asked, how safe is it to bike on South 13th Street? How safe is it to drive on South 13th Street? Across the board, these are perceived as safer than they were before. The comments also showed us that people perceive that traffic has slowed down. So that reinforces what we saw with the speed studies, that data. And they feel that crossing the street is easier too, which again reinforces what we saw with the yielding studies. One other detail that I found really interesting from these preliminary results was that parking is perceived more positively after this change. So officially, this project made no changes to parking, to legal parking. It did prevent illegal parking right next to the crosswalks, but yet people's perception improved. And after discussing that with some community members, we think that one of the reasons might be that with speeding on South 13th Street, people feel very uncomfortable trying to park there. So if that traffic is slowed down a little bit, people are more comfortable parking, and there's not quite as much demand for parking on the side streets only. So that was one kind of unexpected effect that really supports the idea that complete streets improvements can improve the street for everyone, that it's not a zero-sum game. There were a few big challenges to address. The most major and important one is snow removal. So as I mentioned in the maintenance agreements, the bids were responsible for snow removal, and they hired contractors to do so who did an excellent job. But over this last winter, we had quite a lot of snow, quite heavy snows, and this became a serious financial burden. And that's a big problem, both in general and particularly for equity, wanting to make sure that bids across the city are able to do projects like this going forward, even if they don't have several extra $1,000s to drop on snow removal. So our plan for this coming year is to, in our maintenance agreements, allow bids to tell us if snow removal is becoming too much of a burden, and we'll come through and remove the posts just over winter so that the snow plows can come through as they normally would on other intersections throughout the city. And then we can replace those posts come spring after we're done snowing, which hopefully will be in spring and not summer. But in future years going forward, we are interested in having the city handle or pay for snow removal in some form, but that's to be determined at this point. The other challenge is post replacements, but thankfully this did not turn out to be nearly as much of a challenge as we were concerned about. The posts do get knocked down, but after an initial kind of adjustment period, they don't get knocked down that often. So it's not too much of a challenge for the city to come back in and replace them periodically. So what's next for the future? More locations next year or this year. We'll be doing some projects on North Avenue as well. We'll be doing more studies and community surveys. So both the 3 types that I described before, and also other types of community surveys, community interaction, as Mike mentioned at one point, tracking how much passing on the right there is and how much this type of project can address that issue. And we'd also like to look at other types of future improvements, such as decorative crosswalks rather than just regular crosswalks, and also decorative paint within the rapid implementation. So in place of the tan paint, doing some sort of decoration. Another possible change for the future is planters or other types of barriers, so moving beyond only plastic posts. And long term, we would like to turn all of these projects into concrete to move from the kind of preliminary interim rapid implementation to, once we have the funding, actual concrete curb extensions, pedestrian plazas, traffic circles, etc. So we're really excited about these projects, and it is very encouraging to see that both the data that we got back and the community surveys that we got back support the positive results that we've seen. Thank you very much.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Marissa. And next up, we are going to hear from Allison Mills, who is coming to us from Austin, Texas. The title of her presentation is Everything is Quicker in Texas, Retrofitting Streets in Austin, Texas. Allison is the City of Austin's South Area Transportation Engineer, and she oversees traffic safety and operations in 4 of their 10 council districts, including traffic control, pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure implementation, site plan review, and review of large-scale projects such as the recently approved light rail project. She has a strong background in the planning, design, and implementation of multimodal facilities in Austin, Texas, and also in Chicago, Illinois, where she was part of the design team for the Dearborn 2-way protected bike lane through Chicago's Central Business District. As a traffic engineer with HDR Incorporated, she developed the Georgetown Sidewalk Master Plan and Transportation Master Plans for San Marcos and Cedar Park, Texas. She is an avid bicyclist and pedestrian. Besides transportation, she is passionate about food and traveling and would love to have come to Milwaukee to eat fried cheese curds, if not for the pandemic. Wow, we appreciate that that shout out to our culinary masterpiece that we are all so proud of. Well, thank you for joining us, and yeah, we look forward to hearing what's happening in Austin.
Wow, okay, that's not showing the title of my presentation, but like she said, it's Everything is Quicker in Texas, and my name is Allison Mills here in Austin, Texas. Toasty, Austin, Texas. Austin is located in Central Texas, south of Dallas and west of Houston. Population as of 2019 was about 950,000, area about 326 square miles. Getting bigger all the time as we annex more and more. I always think it's fun to point out just how big Texas is. The longest driving distance across Texas is nearly 12 hours, about 815 miles, in case you were wondering. Austin, Texas, we are quite a popular tourist destination. We have a large university. We have become increasingly multimodal in the time that I've lived here, the better part of 15 years. We have a lot of buses, we have pedestrians, especially in the central part of Texas, central part of Austin, bicyclists, and boy, oh boy, do we have traffic. Austin is separated into 10 council districts, of which I oversee safety and mobility in 4. which are designated as the south area.
Eh,
Yes,
I apologize for interrupting,
sure.
but I'm going to ask you if you can share your slides with us.
Oh, are you not seeing my screen? Because I thought I was sharing.
Not currently seeing them, no.
Okay, I'll try again.
All right, that looks,
What are you seeing?
we see just a black screen with some yellow type at
Okay,
the
let me
bottom.
try again because I did presentation mode. You're not seeing, are you seeing them now?
Now we're seeing a photograph of a street, east.
Okay, good. Okay, well, let me go back a little bit so I can
All
show you
right,
what I was.
wonderful. I apologize
Okay,
again.
that's okay. I'm sorry. I hope somebody would tell me if you couldn't see something, but
Okay,
I said something was wrong.
all right, thank you.
Great, no problem. So yeah, so this is the map I showed of Texas. Austin is in the middle. This is the driving distance across Texas. Isn't that funny? These are the photographs I was trying to show you. The university, we've got a lot of traffic. We're very multimodal, and we're separated into 10 council districts. So in the South area, I've got streets of varying context. I've got urban streets that look very much like this, density, multi-story, retail, and residential, all in the same area. I've also got streets that look like this, somewhat substandard, no curb and gutter, residents living on larger plots of land, and then also quite wide arterials carrying large amounts of traffic that intersect other arterials carrying large amounts of traffic, which form scary, dangerous intersections. So it certainly keeps things interesting, and there are like a multitude of different transportation challenges. Why do we want to make streets safer in Austin? Well, on average, an Austinite is killed in a crash every 5 days, and someone is seriously injured in a crash every 20 hours. And what I try not to get desensitized to as a transportation engineer is the fact that like these are people, and they have lives, and they have loved ones, and we as a city and I as a practitioner want to do all I can to try to prevent these deaths and injuries. On the right is an example of an initiative that we carried forward this year, series of signage trying to be somewhat flashy and carrying messages to try to encourage folks on some of our arterials with higher crash rates to slow down. So how do we reuse this existing street space we have to improve safety and mobility? We've got a number of tools and methods available to us, which I'm going to cover today. We have historically used routine street resurfacing in order to make safety and mobility improvements. Now we're able to be more proactive about resurfacing certain streets. We also do minor striping removal to make changes. We utilize a lot of the low-cost materials that you have seen a lot of today: striping, flex posts, raised reflective pavement markers, concrete traffic buttons, of which I will show you pictures of, signage. In recent years, we have more opportunity to actually construct some of these things in concrete, which we are able to do with an IDIQ contract and also field engineering, which means we don't have to build out a full plan set every time we do this, and we have skilled field engineers who can go out, assess the drainage and whatnot, and so that allows us to do a lot of these projects very quickly. And all of these things allow us to achieve these desired outcomes, and today I'm going to focus on improving and creating pedestrian crossings, unlocking dedicated space for both walking and biking, and influencing slower vehicle speeds. So historically, we've been able to really expand our bicycle network by following on our public works department's resurfacing schedule. They resurface tens of miles of our city streets a year, and that allows us this blank slate to move lines around, to narrow travel lanes, influencing slower speeds, and also dedicate space to that vulnerable user. We, in simpler times, we're doing up to 30, 40 miles of bike lanes a year, and we're able to very rapidly expand our bicycle network this way. We not only use excess street space for biking, but we also sometimes use it for walking. We have a pretty severe deficit of pedestrian infrastructure here in Austin, Texas, in the billions of dollars. And although we have ramped up our construction of missing sidewalks, there are still people who will not see sidewalks in 10 years, depending on the prioritization. So there are times where we get creative. We use those same low-cost materials to carve out space, especially where we have a high number of pedestrians. And this is an example. This is our east side, one of the places in my area where we see a whole lot of pedestrians, and we want to make sure they are separated from vehicle traffic. This has been in for a while, still haven't managed to construct an actual sidewalk. Couple quick before and afters of pretty transformative street space examples. This is Guadalupe. It runs along campus and into the heart of downtown. We implemented a protected bike lane and some pretty high quality floating bus platforms for our rapid service that goes down this particular street. There was a time that once we were starting to do a lot of on-street bikeways, we started to transition off-street at times and created these shared use path environments. So more and more when we have constraints on the street, we take things off street. It's an example of that. So the silver lining of having streets that were once upon a time egregiously built in terms of width is now there is a lot of room to use to make improvements. And a lot of streets in the South area, residential streets, are 44-foot wide. I like to call this the South Austin Special. And so this is an opportunity that we have, and this is an example of recently where we were able to improve walking to a middle school by adding 2 crossing islands across a street called Billbrook. And that 44 feet allowed us space to do something pretty high quality and also significant as far as influencing slower speeds and creating that 2-stage crossing and that place in the middle where someone can evaluate one direction of travel for a gap and then have a substantial place to stand and then evaluate the other side before completing the crossing. I'll quickly go through the elements of the crossing itself that help to influence the slower speeds. You've seen this, I think, a lot today, but the use of flex posts on the side of the street to narrow the traveled space for vehicles. The striping creates the horizontal deflection, as does the island itself. We have to add a lot of bells and whistles to the island itself because people will hit it. We add paint, we add delineators, those are the flex posts, we add the raised pavement markers, the flexible yield to pedestrians, we are a yield to pedestrian state, and the continental crosswalk markings. But I think they came out pretty nice anyway. But if you don't have the opportunity to construct crossing islands in concrete, we actually do quite a few crossing islands formed with the flex posts themselves. So if you already have the ramps, we can use the low-cost materials. This picture also shows you an example of these concrete traffic buttons that I referred to earlier. Those we often use as the protection to our on-street bikeways. This is just a really great example of another really wide street where we're able to reuse the street space and narrow the travel lanes and create space for other users improve the experience for pedestrians. There's like a trail off screen. So this is just kind of all improvements for all modes at play here. So this was a really exciting project. Another project, a pretty large scale project, we'll be able to kind of touch on how we incorporate and seek out the feedback of the public was a lane conversion and something we referred to as a buffered to protected project, where we take a bike lane that was previously just buffered, like strictly painted lines between the travel lane with vehicles and the traveled space of bicycles, and we actually add protection. And so I'll spend a few minutes on like the public process part of things. We, in pre-pandemic times, would hold an open house. And so this is like a snippet of the website itself. We make the information available both in English and in Spanish. The open house itself is, we like to have open houses where it's well staffed. We're able to have one-on-one conversations with people, so people can ask questions. This project was actually initiated back in 2016, and yours truly was the project lead. And part of what was like an important lesson learned was, you know, we would held the meeting, it would be a library, like a classroom, sort of a mixed bag sometimes on whether there'd be chairs or no chairs. And in this case, there happened to be chairs set out throughout the room. And so although our intention was to have one-on-one conversations with people, the chairs sent the message that there was going to be a presentation. So many people came in, they sat down, they waited for a presentation never happened, they weren't happy, they already weren't happy because we were trying to take a travel lane away from them. And so it was an important lesson in even the room you're holding a public meeting should communicate your intent. If you're not intending for people to sit down and see a presentation, move the chairs to the other side of the room, or make sure to communicate to people that there won't be a presentation and can I answer any questions, you know, so something along those lines. I'm going to try, and please, again, be clear if you cannot see what I'm trying to show you. Can you see what I've changed the screen to?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So I'll quickly show you the website that we try to maintain throughout the course of a project. And this is the website for the Stassney Lane project. I'm happy to send this to anybody who wants to see it. But it contains details about the project itself. We periodically update the website. This is an update just like last month in May. Very clearly kind of outlines the different phases of the project. We now often have surveys that go with the project, so we can gauge like the interest of the community. What does the community like and dislike about the project? Projects tend to kind of like shift, or like different details will change based on the input of the public. And so it's something, especially when we're making such a dramatic change to the street space, we go to great lengths to engage the community and make them feel heard. And also I have seen great value in hearing what people who use the street have to say, because yes, I've been out to the street a handful of times as the engineer of the project, but it's very different than those who actually use the project every day. There's an actual schematic of the project itself. So this is all really the depth of our website, and what we make available to the public has really increased over time. So at any rate, that's just a quick peek at what we try to make available to the public, to be transparent, to be communicative, so people feel like they know what's going on and they know how their world is going, how we're proposing that there will change. Slides can be seen. Good. Okay, great.
Yes, all good.
So I'm gonna kind of quickly move along. Part of the Stassney Lane project, as I said, was proposing to repurpose some street space. The west side of the project was a 4-lane divided arterial-like street, but the volumes were actually pretty low. And so we saw an opportunity to actually repurpose that outside lane as what will be a protected bike lane. This is a snip of a traffic camera just from a few days ago. So this project is being implemented like as we speak, which is pretty exciting. And one just really important thing I'll note about this project is what's really important with these lane conversion projects is making sure to maintain operations at the intersection. And so you can see that like we maintain these 2 travel lanes at the intersection and then we merge it afterwards. And I've been like watching it all week to just make sure it's working. That's the beauty of these traffic cameras. And so in the future, there'll be like, not too far from now, we'll construct a shared use path for that kind of like high quality like connection to the on-street facility like further down. So back to like the importance of engaging the public. You don't often get a lot of warm and fuzzies as a civil servant, but sometimes you do and you hold on to them. And this was just one I got through a public process a few years back from a kiddo who was pretty excited about the shared use path we were building to his school. So thank you all for having me here today. And for those of you out there fighting the good fight to improve safety and mobility in your own cities. So I'm happy to hear from any of you and answer any questions you might have.
All right. All right. Great job, Allison. Thank you so much for sharing about Austin. I think we're going to take the 2 questions that are in the chat. Take a couple minutes to do this, and then we're going to move on to our final panelist, Kate. But from Joseph in the chat, for the rapid implementation projects in Milwaukee, did we receive any feedback from school bus, transit bus, or truck drivers about the design and locations of the installations? So this is for Marissa.
Can you all hear me?
We can, thank you.
Perfect. So we spoke with MCTS, Milwaukee County Transit System, in advance of the project to confirm that they didn't have any concerns. And the only question we really had to resolve was that there was one bus stop that was already planned for removal as part of the MCTS Next program that we just needed to make sure was removed in advance of this project actually being installed. We haven't heard any other concerns from school bus or truck drivers. The only similar concern has been on Harrison Avenue. We heard some feedback that from motorists in general, the crossing distance or the space for 2 drivers to pass each other was a little bit too narrow. So we've gone back and widened that out some.
Right. Great, thank you. Our second question is from James. It's for Allison. He wonders if you could speak a little more about how your department is organized and the importance of staff capacity for these multimodal efforts.
Okay, not muted. How my department is organized. Okay, so I am in what's called the Transportation Engineering Division. There is an active transportation and design division. And at least in like, I guess in this particular case, like for the Stassney project, for example, the active transportation and street design division will work in coordination with me to develop the project. And I've been referred, I didn't experience, but I've been referred to as sort of like a gatekeeper. And so the area engineers, there's 3 of us. Any projects that change the street space are kind of like signed off by the area engineers. And so we have like a group that develops safety related projects. Even though these active transportation projects are safety projects, sort of a group that is more pertaining to, like, specifically to intersection safety. And then we have a Safe Routes to School program that I mentioned. That program is actually over in the Public Works Department. And it gets a little convoluted, and they actually work with the Active Transportation and Street Design Division. And I think the question was specific to staffing. Certainly staffing is really, really important. I oversee 4 of 10 council districts. I have 2 staff and we have like a handful of just legacy projects. Like we just passed in this fall, like a funding for a light rail. So I'm involved in helping to review light rail that's going to be constructed in the next 10 years. We've got corridors that will be reconstructed from the 2016 bond. We've got Safe Routes to School. So there's a lot going on, and a lot of really a few dedicated people trying to help move all this along. So I can get into more detail on all that, but
yeah,
at any rate, a lot kind of funnels through the area engineer offices.
that's well, thank you. And I think that the folks at DPW here probably can appreciate that. And I don't think you have to be at DPW to recognize how complex it can be to take care of some of these projects and all of the competing interests, priorities, funding, and then of course staff capacity. So yeah, I think really interesting and probably something that others might want to follow up with you about. So I appreciate that. All right. Our third presenter during this session is Kate Reardon. She's a transportation planner with the City of Milwaukee Department of Public Works. She manages the city's dockless scooter pilot study, bike share expansion project, and complete streets implementation, among many other responsibilities. Prior to this role, she was the Active Living Program Manager for Health by Design, an Indianapolis-based nonprofit, and the only ever active transportation planner for the city of Fort Wayne, Indiana. She has a master's of urban planning from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And I just want to say, Kate, real quickly, I was very close to Indianapolis last week for the International Making Cities Livable Conference in Carmel. And I was told that it is not pronounced Carmel. I was inclined to call it Carmel, but
a lot of people are.
But the mayor himself called it Carmel. So,
Yep.
But I think that also, just for folks who haven't been there, I think that a lot of these principles we've talked about today are on display in Carmel, Indiana. All right, Kate, thank you for joining us. Her presentation is Active Streets from Barricades to Bump Outs. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa, and thanks to the other presenters. I'll just hopefully get this shared correctly. Okay. So if you can't see it, somebody let me know.
It looks great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. So yeah, as Melissa said, I'm Kate Reardon. I'm a transportation planner with the City of Milwaukee Department of Public Works. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a white woman with brown hair in a ponytail, and I'm wearing a gray and white striped top. I don't know about you all, but I've been having a great time listening to all these presentations. I really, really loved Salita Reynolds' presentation earlier this morning. So if you missed it out, totally find the recording of this afterwards and check it out. There are a couple of things that she said that I wrote down because they're really important for what we're trying to do with active streets. So streets are public spaces. That's something that, I realized in the past 10 years or so, but really our streets are places for people. They take up a lot of our public space in our city, reflecting local culture, and really responding to community needs. So I hope that I'll address some of these things as I go through this presentation. Then I also just want to say, Marissa just talked about our rapid implementation projects. So Active Streets works really well hand in hand with that. So the rapid implementation projects are looking at what can we do on commercial corridors, busier streets, the arterial streets, how can we make those quick changes? And active streets are really focusing on residential streets. So I'm going to take you through kind of the past, present, and future of active streets, even though it just started last year. It's changed from that program that we started last year. So in 2020, this was really our and Milwaukee County Parks response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Cities across the world were doing something similar to this. When car traffic really decreased as a result of the pandemic, people everywhere saw the need to create more space for walking, biking, other physical activities. We here in Milwaukee, we've got 6 permanent trail counters, and in March 2020, we saw a 40% increase in trail usage from the previous year. Overall, that flattened out to about 19%, but still it was great evidence that people were getting out there and being active. So we knew that we needed more space for people to maintain that safe physical distance from one another. So we at the city chose 4 different streets throughout the city. We wanted to make sure we had a good geographic spread of where these streets were. We also looked at planned bike boulevards and other low traffic streets that were continuous for a certain amount of length. And I'll go over what we did on those streets, but the county chose a number of different parkways. They weren't all open throughout the active streets season, but they did completely shut down those streets because there aren't people that live on the parkways. So this began in mid-May, and for the city, we concluded in mid-November. So this is what our setup looked like, and it looks like this again this year. So we used barricades and signage at key intersections on these active streets corridors. We created a sign to say, what can you do on the street? What is the purpose of this street? And we really tried to just limit through traffic on these streets and slow down the traffic that was going on that street. So as you saw, we had 4 streets throughout the city, and the county had a number of different streets too. And we saw some neighborhoods like really took to these streets immediately. So we did Fratney, which is now a bike boulevard in River West, that had people using it almost immediately, walking in the middle of the street with their dogs, teaching their kids how to ride bikes. Same things happened in Humboldt Park, in Bayview, and Estabrook Park, in Shorewood. People just immediately knew what to do here. But in other communities, we didn't have the same reaction. People needed some more encouragement to understand what these streets were and what their purpose was. So on the Washington Street active street on the south side, 16th Street Community Health Centers really stepped up on their own and started a weekly walking club. So that's that picture on the right. You can see a lot of people, a lot of kids riding bikes, people walking just down the middle of the street. They pull a boombox playing dance music. It's really great and really fun. I encourage everyone who's local to go check it out on Wednesday nights. And then on the Galena active street, this one actually took a little while to kick off. We didn't get it started right away because residents there had some questions about really what the purpose of that was. So we worked with Alderman Russell Stamper to organize a community walk. So that's an image of us walking there. And then Peak Initiative, which does some programming at Tiefenthaler Park, which was part of the active street. They started doing walking clubs also. So we saw these organizations really stepping up, and that started to plant the seed for what is currently active streets. We also did a survey at the end of the program. We mailed out surveys to people who lived on or near the active streets. We also did an online survey. We saw some really great results. People in general really liked it. So we knew that there was support for continuing the program. But we did learn some lessons too. If you're interested in seeing all the results, you can visit our program website. It's also on my final slide. But we did learn that, barricades and signage aren't a perfect solution to cut down on traffic, as you might imagine. People need encouragement to use active streets. But active streets also represent this great opportunity to think about streets differently and try out new things that residents want. So we decided to change it into a program that would really be a long-term commitment to residents and neighborhoods and community groups. So right now we're in phase 1 of Active Streets. So what we did this year was to put out a request for proposals for community-based organizations to propose the Active Streets locations that they wanted to see. So the organizations are receiving $5,000 from the city to do programming and outreach, and we're going to give them an additional almost $5,000 because of procurement regulations on our end to do arts, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So we're using barricades and signage again, like I said, and then we have not yet, but we will be purchasing these wave delineators that you see in this, you can see in this image here, where we can create very temporary curb extensions on an intersection on the active street. So I've got a number of program goals here. I'm just going to go over the highlighted ones. So one, as I've kind of talked about, we really want to slow motorists so we can create space for people to walk, bike, be active, both during the COVID-19 pandemic, but also beyond. We at the city really want to build trust with residents by partnering with community organizations, and we want to use art to help people to reimagine streets and these public spaces that are their streets. So the responsibilities of the organizations that have received this grant, they're helping monitor the barricade signage and infrastructure, letting us know when things need to be fixed or moved, if we need to add more barricades, if certain ones are getting knocked down frequently, telling us if we should remove them or put them in a different intersection. Promote the usage of the active street to community members, help them understand exactly what it is. Hold community events along the active street. So again, here's an image from last year's Washington Street Walking Club. And finally, provide community feedback to DPW. So as DPW, we're providing ongoing technical assistance. I think another thing that's not on here that, wasn't thought of as an initial responsibility is, now these community groups and residents have a connection to the city. So I've had community groups who I'm working with tell me, we've got an issue with this. I know this isn't what you do, but can you help connect me with other people? So I think that we're also creating this touch point to the city and helping people get other things done. We're providing limited printing and mailing support. So we sent out resident letters to residents on the active streets to let them know what's going on. We're also monitoring the barricade signage and infrastructure. And again, as I said, we'd adjust as needed. So like I said, we're integrating arts. I'm really excited that we're partnering with artists working in education. So in the image on the right, there's a path where they've painted this beautiful rose. This is an example of some of the things that they might be able to do. So like I said, each location has $4,999 for arts. So the organizations have a menu of options. I've gotten lots of requests for painted crosswalks, intersection murals, maybe a community flag. It's really up to what the community members want. And AWE is really great about working with the community members to identify local artists and work with those artists from the neighborhoods to do this type of art. So we received 10 proposals. I had no idea what to expect when we put this RFP out there. We ended up choosing 4. So this map on the right shows the 4 that we chose. So the furthest north is Northwest Side CDC. It's North 25th Street. Number 2 is Metcalf Park Community Bridges. We heard from Melody earlier today. So these are the streets surrounding Butterfly Park. Number 3 is Galena Street, which is managed by United Methodist Children's Services. And 4 is Washington Street, which is managed by 16th Street Community Health Centers. So all of these organizations have proposed really fun and great activities to have throughout the summer and fall on their active streets. So the active streets are up and running right now, and the program will run through early to mid-November. So about, I think it was 1.5 weeks ago now, maybe 2 weeks ago, we held a kickoff with the Mayor Tom Barrett came, and we did a press conference and a community walk on North 25th Street. So there's a picture of Raymond Monk from Northwest Side CDC, one of the staff members there leading this. And then everyone who came went for a walk on the 25th Street Active Streets. It was also really great. We heard from a resident too, who said, you know, she loves that she's getting to meet and know her neighbors, and she's been living on the street for more than 30 years, and this has really helped her get out and meet others, and that's really what we want to do. So like I said, this is really supposed to be a long-term commitment to these neighborhoods and residents. So this is supposed to be a 3-phase program. Like I said, we're in phase 1. So next year will be phase 2. So there may not be interest from all the organizations to go through phase 2. So we'll evaluate eligibility and interest at the end of this year. In phase 2, the organizations will select a smaller section of phase 1. We'll again hire and provide funding for the community organization to do some outreach and data collection. And we will install what I'm calling semi-permanent traffic calming infrastructure. So there's an image here of a rubber speed hump. There could also be some other temporary curb extensions, traffic circles, other things that we can actually install and take out and move in different spots and see what works best. This might stay in place for multiple years, depending on how it stands up and how people like it. But it really gives everyone an opportunity to see what changes could be possible and to try out a couple of different things. And then phase 3 would be permanent infrastructure. So figuring out what worked best with that semi-permanent infrastructure and actually constructing it so that we have permanent traffic calming infrastructure and the type of traffic calming infrastructure that residents want based on what we discovered in phase 2. So lastly, I've got some breaking news, very exciting. We just received, and I think we just found out last week, we received an equity and mobility grant from People for Bikes to accelerate phase 2 to this year. So on just one of the streets, so we'll be working with United Methodist Children's Services on Galena Street, since we kind of did phase 1 last year with the active street. So we just started conversations with them. So I'm really looking forward to trying this out. We'll figure out what works, how much things are going to cost, and then we can make sure that we have good processes and procedures and the adequate budget to do phase 2 for the other streets in coming years. So thanks everybody. There's the program website if you're interested in learning more, milwaukee.gov/active streets 2021. So thanks so much.
All right. Thank you to Kate and to all our presenters. We have a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to go first to Kate, and then we'll circle back and have a question for Allison. Kate, the question is whether there's an organization like Artists Working in Education that isn't artistic, but more focused on science and engineering.
Oh, that's a great question, and I don't think I know the answer.
And maybe if anybody else, if anybody else is able to unmute, if there's it has any insights about an organization like that, we'd love to hear about it.
Yes, that'd be great to know.
Or maybe even homework for some of us to do overnight and bring it with us tomorrow. So. All right. Well, we'll kind of let that simmer. If anybody, contact one of us if you've got any ideas about that, because I think it's great to get these, these various organizations involved for these kind of improvements. So again, a question for Allison. Mike Amsden says it's inspiring to see what's happening in Austin. Can you talk to any challenges you face with the influx of new residents and their viewpoints, perhaps differing from long-standing residents, specifically how it relates to street design projects?
I'd say, honestly, I feel like over the last several years since I've been so deeply involved, it's actually, I think the influx and the turnover of that perspective that's helping us to progress and move forward. I think the attitude of the people coming to Austin tends to be more supportive of what we're doing generally. I think there's this grieving period still going on as Austin grows and people come from like out of state and move here. Like people yearn for the old Austin, and I think some people think it can still go back to the way it was, and really like, no, that ship's really sailed and there's no going back. But it's evident to me in that in 2014, like a light rail initiative fell flat. In 2020, comfortably passed. And I referenced like my having started the public process for STASNY in 2016 and practically got chased out of a library. And then when it was reinitiated in 2019, it went over well. And like that might have had something to do with the catchment area of the project itself, or just like the attitude of like people engaging in the process. But I think you hear more of like, oh, good, like this is going to improve walking, like I walked in New York, or this is going to improve like this, like from where I'm from. Whereas, and I hate to generalize so much because there are certainly people who have been here a long time who are supportive of biking and supportive of walking, but I think it's helping, honestly. Like people coming from other places who have this perspective, who might have seen these things, to support these really like transformative projects that are making these other forms of transportation besides just a single occupancy vehicle like so much more viable. So.
All right, great. Thank you. Finally, we're going to circle back to the question about the science and engineering organization. I think we're looking for clarification about whether that the question is about STEM programs, or if there are certain STEM programs that might that might kind of fit into this. Oh, here I see in the chat, yes. An organization in Chicago called Chicago Mobile Makers that trains and supports public interest in architects, designers, and engineers. Yeah, I think that is definitely something to explore. Maybe I'll do a quick Google search. Maybe some other folks from the team will as well, and see what's happening. Sometimes, these initiatives come upon us really quickly, and I think it's really important that we all share with all of our networks these kind of opportunities. So a really good question. And Richard, thank you for providing your insights about Chicago. Well, I'd like to thank the three panelists from this session. I thought it was a great information, and I'm just really appreciative of you sharing your expertise and insights. If there are no more questions for these three folks, I think we're going to shoot it over to Mike Amsden.
All right.